Welcome to the Fire These Times, a podcast dedicated to the easy task of tackling the 21st century. It is a project born out of my conviction that doing so requires an interdisciplinary and intersectional approach to understanding our complex world. I'm your host, Jawed Ayub, and in these episodes I bring you conversations at the intersection of politics, history, philosophy, culture, science, and all the fun stuff in between. The following episode was first published for monthly Patreon supporters. To become a monthly Patreon supporter, please head out to patreon.com/firethesetimes or check the website for other methods. You can become a supporter for as little as $1 a month. And if you cannot donate, you can still support this project by sharing with your friends and family and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. The music of this podcast is by Tarabit. Here's the episode. So before we start, I just wanted to say a few things quickly. There's going to be fewer episodes until the end of the year because I'm going to take a bit of a break, and I'll be back in early 2022 with many more episodes at the regular schedule. So what is most likely going to happen, although it's not entirely certain yet because it will depend on whether I have the time to interview more guests before, is you will have an episode every 2 weeks instead of an episode every week. And that will remain the case until November. December will likely be off, although I haven't decided on that yet. So you may still have an episode or two in December. But in any case, as of January, things will go back to normal. I hope that's okay with everyone. This podcast is essentially a personal project, so I do everything from the research to the hosting to the post-editing and all of that stuff, even advertising online and promotions and all of that crap. So it does take out a lot of me, and 4 episodes a month is a lot of work. So I hope that's understandable. Although I think it's already been repeated in the general introduction. Obviously, if you can support on Patreon, please do so. It's on patreon.com/firethesetimes. You can opt for monthly donations or even yearly donations that are cheaper overall. And you'll have access to a lot of things like, early access to the audio interviews, exclusive access to some of the video conversations, and so on and so forth, and other stuff as well. So this is a conversation with Paz Peña. She's a Chile-based independent consultant and activist, and she recently published a paper entitled Bigger, More, Better, Faster, The Ecological Paradox of Digital Economies for Global Information Society Watch, or GISWatch. We spoke about digital economies and environmental sustainability. What does it mean? What does she mean with the ecological paradox of digital economies, and especially the ecological paradox of what we usually call dematerialisation? We spoke about smart cities, or so-called smart cities, as well as the Internet of Things. And sort of linked to all of that is the problem with techno-solutionism. So that was a big part of this conversation as well. I then asked her to sort of imagine what technology could look like in the framework of degrowth and postgrowth. And because we had some more time, I also asked her to discuss another piece of hers on why artificial intelligence is a feminist issue. I guess a underlying theme of this entire conversation is that technology is not neutral. And this is an important point because often technology is thought of as neutral. And I think part of this episode, a big part of this episode, is to complexify this concept or this idea. Modern technology happens, broadly speaking, within a capitalist framework. And part of the goal of this episode is to make this visible because it is often rendered invisible. So that's it really on my part. As usual, thanks for listening and take care, everyone.
My name is Paz Peña, and I'm an activist and consultant working at the intersection of digital technologies, feminism, and social justice. And I would say in the last 5 years, I've been closely working in the relation between digital technologies and climate and ecological crisis.
Right, and so I'm having you on in that capacity. You wrote an essay or a paper for the Global Information Society Watch, at least part of it, called Bigger, More, Better, Faster, The Ecological Paradox of Digital Economies. So let's just start from the start, if that's okay. What is the paper about? What are its main arguments? What are you arguing in it?
Sure. So in this piece, I basically wanted to review the evidence behind the idea that digital technologies are some sort of logical step towards a more sustainable economy. In this general context where technologies, and particularly digital technologies, seems to be one of the keys to mitigate the ecological and climate crisis that we are facing as a humanity, no? So I basically wanted to see if that sustainable promises behind digital economies were a real thing. And I found that in several aspects, the more we digitize the economy, the more impacts we have on our environment. So in this context, we need to, and I argue, that we need to think in digital economies that are more innovative, that only be less of the same. We need to develop digital economies in a framework where, its core is not some sort of green capitalist extractivism. And that is a little bit of the challenge we need to address as technologists, developers, designers, thinkers, etc. And that is the paper all about.
Right. And so, as the title suggests, the whole ecological paradox of digital economy is that usually when we think of digital economy, at least most people probably, we think of the example that I'm going to give, for example, like, there's 1 million music albums being, if we actually produce the actual physical album, it seems worse than downloading the music album 1 million times. And that's what I think most people think of when they think of digital economies. That's the term is dematerialization, right? What is missing from this analysis? What are the certain flaws in this analysis, if that makes sense?
Yes. In a way, I think digital economies are very tied to the ideological idea that what is digital doesn't have a materiality. For example, the idea of the cloud is something that is clean, that is in the air, far away from these like mega infrastructures that are in the borders of our cities, called data centers, for example. No, so that is what is happening today with the discussion of dematerialized economy. We think that dematerialization doesn't have any impact on the environment. But when you review more of the evidence, the picture changes. So, for example, when I reviewed the evidence for this article, I found that first, because the energy demand of these digital technologies is increasing and it's not that efficient yet, we still have a challenge in that. No? And if you think that the digital economy is still very high energy consumption activity, and if we are still having an energy matrix based on fossil fuels, this is a very bad news for the climate crisis. But also because the digital economy needs devices to work, computers, cell phones, tablets, the whole other set of products to fulfill the dream of the Internet of Things, for example, you're gonna have a problem of e-waste and all the waste that you produce to have this kind of devices, digital devices. Also, you have to take into account the ecological costs of the extraction of raw materials to manufacture the new generation of technological devices, which we can talk about that later. And of course, we cannot forget the political problem that you have when the digital economies base their business model today in extracting personal data, for example, where human activities are seen as another mine to extract resources. And today, much of the digital economy is based in the idea to surveil the personal behaviors, to profile people and sell those profiles, for advertising and so on and so forth. So even if dematerialization of the economy is critical in the Anthropocene, meaning that we have to transform products into services, and of course, digitization is key for that. We cannot erase, the different socio-ecological impacts of that transition. No, in other words, it's not free. There are costs, and people, communities, and other species even who pay those costs. And I think we need to acknowledge that.
For sure. And a lot of the problem seems to be, I think, that most of us simply don't understand how digital economies function in the first place. Most people, I think, I mean, I'm basing this on my own experience, and I think it's a general rule that we may know some things about how the internet functions, but for the most part, it's very abstract and it's very technical. And yet, obviously, as you mentioned, an increasing part of our economy, a dominant part of our economy now, pretty much worldwide, at least it's becoming worldwide, depends on those very infrastructure. And there are certain aspects of it that are a bit more, I don't know if more understood, but definitely better reported. So I think many people know that Bitcoin is highly consumptive, for example, in terms of energy requirements. I read the other day that a single transaction is the equivalent of binning 2 iPhones or something like that. So it's kind of put things a bit in perspective of how energy consuming it is, but this is just one technology. This is just one thing. And it sort of brings me to the other thing of because you talk about smart cities, and smart cities is one of those things that it's developing at dizzying speeds. It feels all around the world, but I mean, especially in the West and other parts of the world as well. And it's being called the fourth industrial revolution, all of these in quotation, obviously. And there are lots of terms, as I said, they are being used to explain what is happening. And I have just you use some of them, obviously, the Internet of Things, 5G, big computing, big data analytics, artificial intelligence, blockchain, and high performance computing. So a lot of it, to listeners who are probably like me, and I consider myself well-read, will say, okay, this is just a lot of tech stuff. This is just a lot of technology stuff. And I understand computers are a bit everywhere. They connect to one another. There's cables under the sea, it ends up being a bit disconnected. And part of this disconnection facilitates this whole, out of sight, out of mind. It's just happening at a scale that we don't understand. And I don't understand on a daily basis how just using my phone can be as bad as, as something more concrete, let's say, as polluting a river or something that just feels more visual anyway. My question to you is more can you explain just some of these terms, like Internet of Things, because I know that smart cities would depend on them. And what are smart cities in the first place? What's the difference between a smart city and a stupid city?
Yes. Nobody wants to live in a stupid city, no? Yeah. Buzzwords like smart cities, 5G, Internet of Things, artificial intelligence, are concepts that are very common in the technological world and are very interesting per se, I think, because many of those concepts kept the very promise of technologies, like better, faster, cleaner, greener, smarter, etc. The idea that the digital technologies are the only means for progress. So think about technologies as a train, a train in motion that transport all those promises in road to progress. And you can be like a person or a nation or a city or a gender need to get on the train, because otherwise you are going to be left behind. So when you analyze the world of digital economies, you have to keep in mind all these metaphors, I think, especially that marketing metaphors, like smart cities and Internet of Things or wherever, because they help you to critically analyze all the ideological framework regarding digital technologies, I think. So, for example, smart cities, which of course is a great marketing name, because as you said, nobody really wants to live in a stupid city. Smart cities is the concept that denotes that the use of digital technologies will transform the way we plan, develop, and live in cities. And because we have such a great computer capabilities today, we can quickly manage a lot of data, known as big data. So basically, a smart city is a city where through different digital devices, you can get a lot of data from the city and manage the needs of the city in a better way, no? From data transport, data from, about pollution, health services, whatever it is. So in that context, for example, Internet of Things, which is another like incredible marketing concept in the digital economy, is the concept behind the idea that every device in our life can be digital. I mean, besides the typical ones, like the computer and I don't know, the smartphones, etc. No, so for example, your fridge can be a digital device. Your coffee machine, your your masseter, whatever device you have in front of you, can have a chip, a small processor, and be a smart device. All those devices interconnected with themselves and with, of course, the internet will make it suppose your life easier, no? They say, at least. But also you have to consider that all that data that is produced is not necessarily produced by the machine by itself, but by the person using that device, no? Even in the paradigm of smart city, or in the paradigm of Internet of Things or whatever, is a person that is producing all that data. So basically, you as a user are producing a lot of personal data about your everyday life, your habits, your routine, etc., and that is the data, the data, that is handled by private companies to produce money, and that's why people, as for example, Shoshana Zuboff is talking about surveillance capitalism, because capitalism has expanded to the point to exploiting the people's behaviors through these devices.
Right. She describes it in the context of social media, especially. She describes it as trading
with Google, especially. Yeah.
And people's futures, trading in people's futures. One thing that a number of things you just said are very interesting. One thing or two things I think that comes to mind is, one, this concept of quote unquote free market, which actually often depends on government incentives and government funding and subsidies and so on, when we're talking about big data and technology. The other thing is this metaphor of the train that you mentioned. This, I think, is one of the frustrations that I have when it comes to the so-called revolutions around the fourth industrial revolution and stuff like that, because it's essentially like, the way it's portrayed is that there is history with a capital H, and you either want to be part of history or you're going to be one of the losers, and those are the only two options that exist. You're either a winner like us or you're a loser like everyone else, or whatever. And this is quoted in the language of, depending on the context, depending on the situations, of inclusivity, of empowerment, of anyone can do anything anywhere, anyone can be an entrepreneur anywhere, and it can feel good. It can on a basic emotional level, it can really seem like something that is positive. The problem, other than this not being accurate, but the problem with that is the complicity, because in order to buy into this model or to this train, to jump on this train, we have to basically, it's like in the small format when you sign those users agreements on the internet, you have to accept that this is what it's going to do, this is the pollution, this is the cost, this is the whatever, except that most of us, of course, don't read the fine print. And even if we do read the fine print, the way it's being built or the way it's being portrayed is that, well, this is what you have to deal with if you want a job now. This is what you have to know these things, or else you're screwed, essentially. And so at least people with very difficult choices, people who want to be ethical, people who are opposed to these changes happening in this specific format, they can be portrayed as anti-technology,
anti-system.
It could be a number of of like very negative buzzwords to counteract the very positive buzzwords that they would use.
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's fascinating how technologies is also part of that ideological framework where growth and speed and the only way that you can have a well-being is through capitalism and through neoliberalism in some countries, etc., etc. I think that it is fascinating, actually, as I said before, seeing the metaphors that we use in the technological world. No, this fourth revolution makes you think about the disruption of technologies. No, but if you analyze technologies, they are not so disruptive. They are actually very quite coincidental with the hegemonic forces. No? So, for example, some writers and thinkers have said that today technologies, now the technologies that come from Silicon Valley, that they told us they are so disruptive and innovative or whatever it is, the only thing that they do is basically to make more efficient capitalism, no? to make more efficient the way that we developed the world since like 500 years ago. No, so that is very fascinating to me, and I think, as you mentioned, you have to be very careful in even to consume the discourse around these technologies, because I think those discourses are very carefully crafted to see technologies as the only, these technologies at least, no, these hegemonic technologies as the only way to get progress and to get the well-being of the societies.
Yeah, one very useful example I think of whenever I get confused about thinking about these questions is a lot of the buzzwords usually mean, and here it's kind of a simplistic example, but that's what I mean, that it just helps me think of, like, we want to make it easier for you to pay, rather than we want to tackle income inequality, or we want to increase wages, or we want to, what have you, a wealth cap. Those are things that are taboos and aren't really talked about in those circles, I mean. Whereas the language of innovation and disruption is just that, well, before you had to pay with 2 credit cards and now you can pay with your phone. Those are the that's where a lot of the innovations end up going, because it facilitates, as you said, this transfer of wealth. You've described very well this so-called revolution. So if it's okay, I'm just going to read what you wrote and just ask you to kind of walk us through this this example. So you wrote, revolutions demand speed. A sense of urgency infects lethargic states that lack ideas to achieve massive social well-being. The initiative in public policy is now dictated by the private sector, and like a breath of help, they demand governments facilitate the quote-unquote digital transformation. It is a win-win situation. Private companies will have infinite data mines, each one of us, and states will be able to have an increase in production and therefore better growth figures, end quote. And I can also add, like, states will also use those data mines for themselves as well in many contexts.
Yeah, for sure.
So walk us through this example, if that's okay.
Sure. So, well, neoliberalism, which is dominating in the Western world, but also in global South, as in the case of Latin American continent, no? Neoliberalism says that innovation is a private and individual thing. No, the only innovators are the private actors and not the states, because the states are big, are slow, are not efficient, no, etc., etc. No, so the only innovators are the private actors and not the states. But what people, as for example, Mariana Mazzucato has shown us, is that you cannot have a private actor innovating, especially regarding technology, without a state investing in that innovation. No, but anyhow, in this context in this neoliberal context, digital economies have been developed with what is called the public-private partnership, where states funding technological developments and creating some sort of adequate and minimal legal framework to create certainty for private actors, and private actors do the thing that they're supposed to know better, quoting technological innovation. So this would be a win-win situation for states because they facilitate new markets for the economies to grow, and the private sector can innovate, again with quoting, innovate in that digital economy freely. However, again, digital economies today sadly necessarily imply extracting personal data and surveillance capitalism, and as we have discussed before, the whole chain of exploitation of natural resources, etc., etc.
And this language, I mean, it's the language of techno-solutionism, right? The language, the concept that tech is at the center of any and all solution, including any of our problem, including the problems that tech is, or at least big tech is causing. And through that framework, as you know, one of the subtitles in your own paper is that climate change becomes a business opportunity. And it ends up being like, so in another paper by Camila Nobrega and Joanna Varon, who I'll interview next, they give this example of Google using, or at least, I don't remember if it was, they actually started doing it or they are going to do it, like actually putting sensors in the Amazon and using AI to supposedly detect drilling and stuff like that, and or chainsaws, or detect chainsaws and stuff like that. And so it ends up really becoming a situation where any and all solution will have to come from those existing companies, or if it is even any other company that may have some solution, those big companies will end up buying them anyway. And what is left out, obviously, is everything else. What is left out is existing solutions that already exist, like the whole what was it, the joke of, at the time, Elon Musk said like he has like $1 million or whatever to for people who develop a technology to extract carbon from the air. And I don't want people to misunderstand, that might be part of a framework at some point anyway. I'm not anti-tech in and of itself, but the problem obviously is that we already have existing structures called nature, called forests, that do this quite well. But those aren't profit oriented, those aren't capital friendly. And so anything has to then first be rendered capital friendly, and then we can talk about these other things. And maybe at best nature becomes this small patch somewhere outside of a city or outside of whatever, where we agree not to destroy that small bit, and that's about it. And we've seen this quite a bit. I'll get into this more obviously when it comes to the Amazon in the next episode, but I'm curious, like, if you can talk a bit about this, the problem of techno-solutionism, or the problem of these green growth, which is the next thing I want to get into, within the framework of what we know about the climate emergency, like what we know the link between what we know about the link between the so-called growth economies and capitalism and consumption and extractivist economies, and their impact on climate change, and obviously worsening climate change. So how do we then square what they are trying to present, or what a number of these big companies try to present as part of the solution, with what we know is actually the problem? Because it really feels that they're trying to convince us of something that we know is not the case. And at some point, this just something doesn't work.
Yes, absolutely. I think one of the main problems is that what these hegemonic technological solutions are trying to do is to do more efficient capitalism, and to do more efficient capitalism, it means also to make more efficient extractivism, extractivism capitalism. And we know all the problems that kind of development has in terms of, exploiting the planetary boundaries, that today are, probably in the last of their capabilities. No, so I think that is the main problem today with technologies. It's not the problem with technology per se, as you said before. I don't consider myself a technophobic or anything else similar to that. The problem is that technologies today are developed in a framework where the only goal or aim is to make more efficient capitalism, and we're going to have a problem with that today or tomorrow. But the problem is that in the context of the climate crisis and the ecological crisis that we are facing, is that we don't have much more time, to waste and trying to think about and trying to make more efficient capitalism, because capitalism has its core in extractivism of nature, and that is a problem today. So I think the challenge that we need to face today is to think about innovation in other ways that only in technological developments. We need more than to think in innovation in technology. We need to think in innovation in the economic and in the economical paradigm around that development of technology. And I think in the paper that we are discussing today, that I wrote in the GISWatch publication, I think one of the possible ways out that I am trying to discuss around this problem is that maybe we need to think about technologies that are developed in the framework of degrowth paradigm, or post-growth paradigm, or whatever it is. But I think it's super important now to shift that kind of paradigm where we think about technologies, because in other ways we're going to still have this kind of individual efforts of doing, like, I don't know, hackathons for climate or whatever it is, which is, I think, is very valuable, but it's not very sustainable in terms of the economy. And I think today the challenge is to think in other paradigms of economies, to develop technologies in that kind of framework.
Right, and I want us to get into a bit more on how that might look like in terms of degrowth and post-growth. Like if we try and shift the paradigm, because I also advocate degrowth and post-growth as much as I can, and it is something that it is fairly recent for most people. It's very new for most people. It's something that it's even counterintuitive for a lot of people. They think that we will have a lower quality of life if we have degrowth, stuff like that. One thing that before we get into that, if that's okay, I just remembered of another example when we were speaking in the beginning of this conversation around dematerialization. One thing you quote a recent study, by Longinal about ICT, so information and communication technologies, for those who don't know, about the fact that dematerialization may happen in certain sectors but not in others. And the example, it is what it. So I'm just going to quote the finding that you yourself quote. While it is probable that dematerialization has occurred in specific sectors of the economy, including, for example, the example that I gave before, the digitization of music, books, and movies are examples, as well as the rise of telecommuting and teleconferencing and the ubiquity of online shopping, this is still a limited change, and it has not had an impact on consumption as a whole. Is that because of e-waste and what you already talked about? Can you sort of explain that?
One of the most important promises of digital economies was this idea of dematerialization of economy, the idea of which is, I think, is very important, and it's very important in the context of the climate crisis that we are going through, is the idea that we have to transform products into services. No, this is the contrary that we did at the Industrial Revolution, where we transform services into products. Now we have to go the other way around, and we have to transform products into services in terms to decrease the use of any type of resources, and of course be more efficient in the way that we use energy, etc., etc. And that is a very interesting and important promise on a digital economy, and I personally believe in that kind of promise. However, I know there's a lot of other problems that can imply that kind of transformation. For example, the concentration of the markets. No, and you can see that, for example, in the cultural industry today, the mainstream cultural industry with Netflix and I don't know, all that kind of services that are, concentrating the power of that kind of services. But even saying that, which I think is super problematic, I think in a way that is it is important to highlight that the digital economies will allow us to make that kind of dematerialization of the economy, and that is important, and we need to do that super like urgently. I know that, but as the evidence is showing, the dematerialization of the economy is not something that can be granted for all the industries. There are industries that it doesn't gonna work, that kind of digitization, or not in the scale that we really wanted, or that the scale that we need in the context of climate crisis. But also, as you mentioned, the problem of digitization in terms of dematerialization is that you will always need devices to make digitization. No, you need a device, you need chips, actually chips that use a lot of minerals and etc., etc. And I think today we are in a period of the history today, because of the COVID-19 or whatever it is, that we have a lack of chips, to produce digital devices, which is a big crisis, including in the in this idea of the necessity of transform our economies in digital economies. So yes, one of the problems with dematerialization is that we need to produce more devices, and devices need two things. One, minerals to be produced. For example, we need batteries, batteries for our devices, and batteries are based in minerals as lithium. So, for example, I live in Chile. In the north of Chile, in the Atacama Desert, there are salt flats where are a lot of lithium resources. So this is a problem, because we know that, for example, you need lithium for your devices, but the extraction of lithium in the north of Chile is causing lack of fresh water to the indigenous communities, and then the displacement of that indigenous communities to other cities. Of course, there's a lot of and a huge ecological impact in the desert, etc., etc., etc. So you have again a problem of an ecological, economical, cultural problem there. But also in producing these devices, as you mentioned, you have the problem of e-waste. And this is a very interesting problem, because many people say, listen, why don't we just use e-waste to produce new technologies, and some sort of circular economy, no? Which of course is a great idea, but the problem today is that not all the devices that we produce are thought in a way or designed in a way that is easier to use e-waste, no, to disarm the device and use the minerals, etc., etc. It's not so easy. You have to design the product for doing that, and today we're far to be in that position. Also, e-waste is a very toxic industry. Also, no, so there's a lot of different costs that sometimes we just don't talk about it, because again this ideological framework where digital world, the digital economy doesn't have any materiality, so we just don't want to talk about it because it's ugly, because it's not so clean and smart, no? So again, I think that is one step that we need to address as humanity, even, no, as a planet, is that we have to start to talk about that things that sometimes we think that are ugly and that are, we don't really want to talk about it. And I think it's today the opportunity that we have to talk about green technologies and the green transition of energies and etc. We need to talk about that, but also talk about the costs of that, because it's the only way I think that we can address climate justice.
Yeah, I would say that there are movements, and in some cases it has been passed into law to pass things like the rights to repair, and basically forcing company at the source to include. I don't understand the specificities, but so that a phone can be dismantled and its individual parts reused and or repaired. But that, as you mentioned, has to be done in the design of the phone, as an example, of course, in the first place. So okay, I think this is clear. Another thing that would be interesting to get into, as I mentioned before, is if we do shift, or if we are arguing for shifting the paradigm from a growth-oriented model to one that is more degrowth and or post-growth. The two are interrelated. At some point I'll do an episode getting into them more in depth. But how would that look like, if that makes sense? I will preface this question, if that's okay, with a couple of things. One, you yourself cite the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, as them saying that the ecosystem of I'm just basically going to paraphrase, that the ecosystem of interdependent digital technologies that underpin digital transformation will evolve and continue to drive future economic and social change. Okay, so this is what they say. At the same time, we know of the fact of climate change, and we know, as we both of us already mentioned, that current resource extraction practices and what I can only describe as growth-obsessed economies are the cause, at least largely the cause. I've mentioned something similar in a recent piece for Shadow Mag. It's called The Emotional Case for Postgrowth, in which I also talk about degrowth anyway. But I cite the European Environment Agency, which is the EU's environment agency, which the EU regularly ignores, I should say. But the EEA themselves, in one of their latest reports, and I will include all of this in the blog post, they said that green growth, quote unquote, is, quote, unlikely, end quote, and they themselves are calling for, quote, growth without economic growth, end quote. So essentially, I think they couldn't say that they support degrowth and post-growth immediately. So they say that growth without economic growth, which is actually literally what degrowth and post-growth are about.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so this is the paragraph that they themselves, it's from the abstract of their own paper. Economic growth is closely linked to increases in production, consumption, and resource use, and has detrimental effects on the natural environment and human health. It is unlikely that a long-lasting absolute decoupling of economic growth from environmental pressures and impacts can be achieved at the global scale. Therefore, societies need to rethink what is meant by growth and progress and their meaning for global sustainability. End quote. And so this is the EU's Environment Agency essentially saying that it is highly unlikely that we get to a point where we are able to uncouple, to decouple. And decoupling, for those who don't know, is that the idea is that you would have growth without the damages that growth produces. And they're saying it's unlikely, or even if it is possible in certain sectors, in certain examples, it's just not possible at scale. It's just not possible to scale it wide enough to the point that it's going to reduce or even mitigate the damages that we're causing with climate change. So you yourself in your paper, you put forward a proposal essentially for using technology for egalitarian socio-ecological transformation, your words. What does that look like? Take us, maybe if you have some examples, or what is required to sort of shift that paradigm, if that makes sense.
Sure. So I must say I'm not a degrowth or post-growth specialist, but fine. I do believe because science is telling this, and UE is telling us, and there's a lot of evidence around this, that with this extractivist logic, we are reaching our planetary boundaries. No, we need to change the way we relate ourselves as human species with non-human species, but also with the planet as an entity per se. No, so in this context, what I'm saying is that we have to stop thinking in innovation only in terms of technology, but in terms of the economical paradigm that encompass the digital technologies. No, that is the truly innovation we need in technology today. No, and in that sense, the degrowth paradigm could be a very interesting framework where we can develop digital technologies. Even though I know the growth paradigm is still, incipient, and we need to talk about that more and thinking about more in terms of social justice, etc., etc. No, even said that, I think it's a very interesting framework where we can start to think and imagine, a new digital technologies. So, for example, you have to take care of what are the different costs that imply, the devices that we want to use, for example, in this degrowth paradigm. So, for example, efficiency in the use of energy and batteries should be one important aspect of these degrowth technologies. No, the amount of energy that we use, etc., etc. Other aspect can be that these technologies doesn't want to exploit personal data of people, for example. No, in the context of of rejecting this idea of see people as raw material. No, other aspect maybe could be that could be a set of digital technologies that avoid the overconsumption of products or text for pleasure, that avoid work more extra hours, etc., etc., etc. Whatever is the form, we need to innovate, in the economic paradigm that is dominant today in the digital world. When you change that paradigm, for example, to the growth, and you start to thinking about, how it will be an economy for the growth, you immediately start to think differently about that digital technologies, and you start to make and to think about a world that is not only about make more efficient the capitalism, but as I think you said before, to think in design technologies to make a world more, with more solidarity, with a more sustainable relationship with non-humans, etc., etc.
And I like that you mentioned how degrowth has to also include obviously a social justice component. It tends to as a general trend, but it is important to mention that degrowth in a context that is not trying to be explicitly decolonial, for example, may actually
Exactly.
may have even unintended consequences. But it is important to highlight that. And as one of the frameworks, I know, of course, you encourage a decolonial and a feminist framework. Since we have a bit more time, if that's okay, I know that you have. I checked your website. I know that you have. You argue that AI, like artificial intelligence, is a feminist issue. For many people, I think they won't necessarily see the link between artificial intelligence and a feminist framework, that's a feminist lens. Can you explain why?
Sure. So first of all, I think we need to see technology not only as, as the code or as the device, but as the social context that surround technologies. No, in that context, technology is also the users. Technologies is also the costs that the technologies produce, etc., etc. So we have to see technology when we talk about technology. We have to see the big picture, not only the code or the program or whatever it is. So I think if you see if the technology in that way, you can open a world that sometimes for people who is not necessarily related to technology, that they can see that technology is something that actually they have. It's really tied to their lives and etc., etc. So being said that, what we have been working in terms of artificial intelligence is how artificial intelligence is basically based on big data. So you basically artificial intelligence is the program of the different. In terms of artificial intelligence, is the way that we use computers and programs to manage data, big data. So one thing that is enlightening around working in artificial intelligence is that you notice that it's not about necessarily. It is, but it's not necessarily only about programming and how the people is programming artificial intelligence, but also how the people is collecting data. No, and when you start to think about that, and you start to think about what is data today in the world, you can see that data as per se can be something very problematic. So, for example, the data that is collected of women in our country. What kind of data is that? Is that data produced with what ideological framework, for example? What is talking about that data? No, we have to examine that data. When you start to see that, and when you start to realize that sometimes really, how can I say it, biased data is being used for artificial intelligence, you can see that we need a problem of social justice here. So this is why we talk about how artificial intelligence is a feminist problem, in a way that the feminist agenda is always worried about the social justice, racial justice, of course, gender justice, etc., etc., etc. So I do believe, and we do this work with a Brazilian organization called Coding Rights. We do believe that artificial intelligence, more than this technology buzzword, of artificial intelligence and whatever it is, and it's the future, and it's the key for the fourth revolution, etc., etc., etc. Besides that, we really believe that we have as feminists, we really need to examine to look at very carefully what is artificial intelligence is doing with data and how it's dealing with data. Because basically, if we don't do it, we're going to have we're going to have different replicates of problems with social justice, and that's why we are looking at artificial intelligence again, not just thinking about this is so difficult, or this is something that only the programmers have to deal with it, but with the idea that technology is more than the program, and that technology today is so present in all aspects of our lives, even if we don't know, that is so important to democratize the knowledge and democratize the way that we look at technology in terms of more people understanding how the world is, designed today, basically. So that is why we think that artificial intelligence is a feminist problem, as all the technology developments is, of course, a feminist problem when social justice is on the table.
Yeah, I really like this framework because it's also, and obviously I agree with everything you said, and in addition to that, it also emphasizes the fact that existing paradigms or existing technology even is already being influenced by current ideologies. In other words, that they're not neutral, as you said. It's not just that we have this neutral, objective world where things are being produced just because of some magic law of the market of supply and demand and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
This is just, it's not emotional, it's objective, blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
And I think when we look at that through this feminist lens, and of course through an anti-racist and decolonial and all of these other lenses, it becomes clearer and clearer that those existing patterns, the existing paradigm essentially is a paradigm, right? Like it is something that is ideologically driven as well. What gets prioritized, what gets funding, what gets seen as essential versus non-essential, all of those things are related to ideology as well. And I think it's very useful to look at the way you framed it, especially like artificial intelligence being a feminist issue, because if it isn't a feminist issue, if artificial intelligence isn't feminist, what is it? Like there is something that's like, if it is not feminism friendly, let's say, then what are the sort of costs that come by not treating it that way? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And actually, I will add only that one of the aims of the feminists' agenda, I will say, is always denaturalize what it seems or what is presented as natural.
Right.
And this is, again, technology today, especially this kind of technologies, the artificial intelligence, smart cities, or whatever it is presented to you as, the natural step of development, the natural step of capitalism, or whatever it is. And I think it is super important to not accept that and to denaturalize all that kind of technology that is presented, because when they are presented like that, it's because there's there's a motivation for that, to not look at it, to just go with it. And I think we have to actually do the opposite of that, and to examine all that kind of things that are presented to us as natural.
No, for sure. Thanks a lot also for this adding. So before we get into the book section, is there any kind of aspect of your paper that you wanted us to get more into, or?
Yes, I just want to say that this piece is just an invitation. You know, it's an invitation to think differently, but also to embrace technology. I think sometimes as a feminist and also as a leftist feminist, I do believe that sometimes we tend to be technophobic. No, you know, this is a problem. You know, and sometimes that is problematic because even if we don't want to, we just I think in a way we pretend that the natural world without technology is better, which is of course a fantasy, and it's not at all. So I do believe that this piece is more than something that is like you know, a fact. I'm trying not to present facts, but invitations to think about technologies, and especially to think about the costs of what we do with technologies. I think that is so important to think about it. And I come from the world of the digital rights world. I worked in that agenda for many years, talking about surveillance, talking about copyright and technologies, etc., etc. And we didn't talk about the, you know, environmental costs of technologies, and we started to do it just recently, and that is a failure of that agenda, you know, of the digital rights agenda. And we need to rethink about that activism in terms of human rights. It cannot be human rights if there's not social justice, social environmental justice, for example. We need to start to think about those two agendas together. And I think this piece is a little bit of invitation of that, the invitation of thinking about technologies differently, to develop different technologies, but also to start to think about the environmental costs of technologies, especially of digital technologies, because we cannot think about that differently in the context of the climate crisis that we're facing.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that the paper is available for free online. I will include it in the description and on the blog post, as I usually do. And on that note, what are 3 books that you would recommend to our listeners, and why?
Sure. So I choose books that make me think different about technology today, you know, in the Anthropocene context that we live in, but they are not necessarily about technology, no, but they make me think about different about technology. So the first that I would like to recommend is Posthuman Knowledge by Rosi Braidotti, or El Conocimiento Posthumano, which, because I read it first in the Spaniard version of the book, but I think the original book is in English, Posthuman Knowledge by Rosi Braidotti. I think that book is a great opportunity to catch up on what posthumanism is, you know, with all those questions of what is to be human today in the context of the climate crisis. But I think it is also a very affirmative book, you know, which avoids the idea of the Anthropocene as an apocalypse. No, it is a text that, you know, try to search in theory, but also in feminist practices for ways out of, you know, the problem that we're facing today with the climate crisis. So it's a very affirmative, and I think it's a very interesting experience to read it, especially if you are interested in posthumanism, which I think is a very interesting theory. The other one is Cómo pensar juntos, which will be How to Think Together by Isabelle Strengers. I think it's a compilation of 2 lectures by this Belgian scientist and philosopher Isabelle Strengers. I think it's not in English or in any language besides Spanish. But I really encourage people to go and read and look for texts of Isabelle Strengers. She's one of the most brilliant thinkers on the relationship between science and society, I think, in the recent decades. And in this book on Cómo pensar juntos, on how to think together, we can find a series of arguments that allow us to understand, how the neoliberal order prevents us from thinking for ourselves, and how we can deal with that in the context of the Anthropocene. This book, it made me think a lot about, how technologies are part of that neoliberal order, and how, technologies are artificial intelligence prevent us to think together about the world. I think it's brilliant. This is in a Spanish book, but you please go ahead and look for texts of Isabelle Strengers. Is a brilliant thinker, and it has a lot of work with regarding the Anthropocene. So it's really, really interesting. And the other one is one of Holly Buck. It's called After Geoengineering, Climate Tragedy, Repair and Restoration. And I think it's a book from Verso Books. It also has a ebook version that you can download it. And I think it's a very, very, very entertaining book, which plays with the possible futures scenarios and invite us to think again critically about the technologies that we urgently need to mitigate the climate crisis. And I liked this book because it, again, rejects a certain, leftist tradition of viewing technologies with resentment, and on the contrary, invite us, to think critically, but also creatively about technologies. And I think it's a very, very fresh approach, to the Anthropocene and technologies and science. The name is After Geoengineering, Climate Tragedy, Repair and Restoration, by Holly Book.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot for that. I will include all of these in the description anyway for those listening. They all look really interesting. I'm definitely gonna get them all. Paspeña, thanks a lot for your time. This has really been informative and amazing, and I'm sure listeners would agree.
Thank you very much, Joy, for the invitation. It's been a pleasure, and it's been very fun.
The Fire These Times is made possible by supporters on Patreon. If you'd like to support through a monthly donation, you can head out to patreon.com/firethesetimes. And if you want to explore other options, you can do so by checking out the website.